There will always be resistance. The next battle will always be near. As long as you have everything, there will be those who have nothing to fear. And little by little, or maybe all at once, you will lose. Because our future is not yours to choose.
Welcome to Voices of Resistance. You are listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
The viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or the staff.
I'm Barbara Humphrey.
And I'm Albert Strickland.
Co-hosts of today's show. Voices of Resistance is a project of the Savannah Justice and Peace Collective. We give voice to resistors who have no voice in mainstream media and present a wide range of issues that affect us all.
But there will always be resistance. The next battle will always be near. As long as you have everything, there will be those who have nothing to fear. And little by little, or maybe all at once, you will lose. Because our future is not yours to choose.
Welcome to Voices of Resistance. I'm Barbara.
And I'm Albert.
I'm Phoenix.
And we have Savannah on the board. We have talked in the last few shows presenting a case for the abolishment of the prison industrial complex. And today we move to the war on truth, because truth tellers are also taking up many more prison beds than they should. The war on truth is a war on people who speak truth to power, who stand up and speak and act against injustice and oppression. When it's state injustice and or oppression, these people very often pay an extremely high price. But before we get to the war on truth, we have some truth to share, some very special truth.
Today marks the 6-month milestone for Voices of Resistance. 6 months. We went on the air on April 19th, and what a journey it's been. And we're so grateful to have everyone that has joined us, and especially you who are joining us today.
Yes, thank you, all of you. I can still remember those lists of to do it, to not do it, 30 minutes, 60 minutes.
It was a hard decision deciding whether we could fill an hour or not with content, and now we're looking for the second hour because we could keep going. And
That's
especially
right.
now that when we started it was just the two of us, but
Yep.
now we have a very special host with us with Savannah and Phoenix.
Yeah,
And,
we're a foursome.
Okay.
Okay.
That's true.
It's
Yeah, I
fun.
like that.
We are.
Okay.
We are. So, now on to the show. There is a war on truth. There's always been a war on truth. It fills the graveyards. It fills the prisons. It imprisons the man and woman, imprisons the mind, and imprisons us all. It's time to abolish this war.
We agonized a lot on this one, on how to organize this discussion, because it seems so unwieldy, because there's so many facets to it, so many questions, where to begin, what do we do. We know that the first casualty of any war, no matter what type of war it is truth, because wars, if truth were known, would never be fought, so it's not the truth. Yeah, that's your train whistle. But
Well,
the one, so
this
that
is the
train
truth
is
train
here.
coming
that's it.
on.
The truth
Train
train
is here. The truth train has arrived.
That's right. And some of the truth, that we grew up in a very special time. I think Barbara and I did, especially because we grew up in a time when the world was changing rapidly, and we hoped it would be sustained. Of course, it hasn't been,
No.
but it did a lot of good things. And I remember one of the highlights was John Kennedy, and
Yep.
of course, here in the South, he was not liked so much during this time period, and it wasn't until his assassination that he became popular, became the president, that the rest of the country knew he was from the beginning, I guess. But even he began to change when he realized the truth of many things. And one of the things that really helped me along was the fact that how he handled the Cuban situation, that we almost wound up in a war. He didn't listen to generals. He didn't listen to the Pentagon. He listened to his own conscience. He began to realize there was more to things than listening to people who wanted war and profit and that sort of thing. And so Cuba had been demonized for many, many years at this point. The Cuban Revolution was 3 years before his ascension to the presidency. And one of the things he said that caught our eyes, we were going through this, both of us, but especially made it hard, where he made a statement about Cuba, and this kind of changed things for me when thinking about him, because I always thought that Castro was the enemy of everything and had to be poisoned. They tried so many times and failed all the time. But when he said, I believe that there is no country in the world, including any and all of the countries under colonial domination, where economic colonization, humiliation, and exploitation were worse than in Cuba, in part owing to my country's policies during the Batista regime. I approve the proclamation which Fidel Castro made in the Sierra Madre, which he justifiably called for justice and especially yearned to rid Cuba of corruption. I will even go further. To some extent, it is though Batista was the incarnation of a number of sins on the part of the United States. Now we have to pay for those sins. In the manner of the Batista regime, I am in agreement with the first Cuban revolutionaries. This is perfectly clear. That was President John Kennedy on the 24th of October, 1963.
And that was a pretty remarkable statement. And I have to say, up north, depending on where you lived and what your family background was, he was truly loved. So my family were Roosevelt Democrats, and growing up, that's all I heard was the praise of the Democrats and the demonization of the Republicans, which, of course, I've learned to come to get over. But the thing about Kennedy that stood out for me was him breaking the mold, coming from, a family of people who did face some oppression. It was gratifying to me to see that the country did not believe the lies that were told about Kennedy when he was running, that if we elected a Catholic as president, surely the Vatican would be running the country.
And in fact, the Pope's shoes were supposed to be under the Lincoln bed in the bedroom.
That's right. There were all those stories, and I was glad to see that the people didn't buy that nonsense and that he was elected. And in fact, I feel really cheated that we didn't get to see 8 years of his presidency. And there were a lot of things I did not know about him, one of which was that he was actually planning to get us out of Vietnam. And in fact, I have a very short quote from him. This war in Vietnam, it's never off my mind. It haunts me day and night. The first thing I do when I'm reelected, I'm going to get the Americans out of Vietnam. And it so saddens me now to read that, knowing that he didn't get a chance to be reelected and fulfill that promise, thinking about all the death, all the destruction, all the things we live with now.
That was 62 or 63?
That was 63. That was 63. October 20th, 1963.
Okay. October 20th.
Yes.
4 years later, at that time we had 17,000 troops. That was it. 17,000, they called them advisors, trainers, that sort of thing. And he'd already made the decision to pull 1,000 out right away, and then by 65, all would be out.
That's right.
But when I went just 4 years later, after he was assassinated, we had 500,000 people there.
That's
500,000 soldiers.
That's right.
500,000.
Half
from
a million.
17,000 to half a million. And it would never happened had he lived.
And knowing the speech he made about Cuba and the speech about Vietnam, now looking back on it with my many years of experience, it's not surprising that he was one of those truth tellers who wound up in a graveyard.
That's right.
And
he was the one that the corporations and the military could not afford to allow to live, to put this plan into action. Because look at the billions that were made and the control of the things that happened
Absolutely.
After he died.
And it was his assassination and then the conduct of the investigation, the Warren Commission, which was such a miscarriage of justice. And I remember living through that. I feel like that was my awakening. That was my political awakening. And when I learned that the documents in that investigation were going to be buried for 99 years, it was like, well, what do I do? How do I educate my children about how important this is? Make sure this information is unearthed. And they sort of look at me like, oh, yeah.
I know.
You know.
Well, that also brings up the point of truth and the value of
Yes.
truth. If you bury the truth, you can continue the lie. So
That's
they
right.
buried this truth. And whenever you think about it for a moment, if
Yep.
truth is that dangerous to you, that the truth cannot be known without endangering
That's
your
right.
being, your establishment as a nation, then perhaps you
It's-
shouldn't exist. I mean,
That's
there
right.
should
It's
be
even more
alternatives
important
to
that it comes out.
So being our position, we see this in one way, but I'm
I
sure that you see it differently.
Well, I was going to say that I think that there's a really big problem today wherein even if you could say to people and prove to them, show them like declassified documents, for example, and show them that these conspiracies do happen, the fact is that being lied to by the government has pretty much become the norm. A lot of people have just accepted it, and a lot
Right.
of people have accepted the fact that there's false information out there, and I think it causes a lot of people to just become apathetic to being informed at this point.
Yeah. Well, we were told at the time that it was too dangerous for the truth to come out because too many of those people were still alive and it would disrupt, the whole government could collapse if that truth came out. And, you know, some of us
Well,
think, let it
If
be.
only.
If only.
Yeah, because think of the millions of lives that would be alive,
That's right.
and the millions of people that wouldn't be living in poverty, perhaps, had the truth been known, and
That's
governments
right.
topple when they have
That's
to.
right.
So
Yeah.
with Phoenix and Savannah, the generation, and especially even now this generation, I kind of
I
I
know.
don't know where's truth going from here, you know,
Right.
because in my lifetime I have seen nothing but lies. Basically,
Nothing but lies.
I was lied to about Vietnam. I volunteered. I was one of those going gung ho. We've got to fight and do this stuff. I believed all the lies,
Mm-hmm.
and it killed 58,000 so Americans. But think of the millions of Vietnamese,
That's right.
Laotians, Cambodians,
That's right.
and others who died because of these lies.
And are still
That's
dying
right.
to this
and
day.
still dying, thanks to Agent Orange and the unexploded ordnance in the country. We left a lot behind that we have not cleaned up and never apologized.
But we never left the truth behind.
No truth left behind. And 5 years later, Robert Kennedy is is assassinated, and I think it was then that many more people suddenly realized there are certain things in this country that you don't mess with for fear of your life. And certainly the CIA, the mafia, were linked to the
FBI, don't
the
forget
FBI.
J. Edgar now.
That's right, J. Edgar Hoover were associated with the first assassination, and Bobby was no friend of the CIA, the mafia, the Teamsters, and he was the Attorney General under his brother's administration.
He also opposed the Vietnam War.
Yes, he opposed
And-
the Vietnam War. He was a supporter of the Poor People's Campaign, of MLK.
In fact,
Cesar
it was his
Chavez.
idea, basically, to support this Poor People's Campaign.
That's
which
right,
really
coming to
surprised me. I
Washington.
didn't realize that
yeah,
either. Yeah.
I didn't realize that either. He supported
And
the
Cesar Chavez and
Yeah.
the workers out
the
in
California farm
California.
workers. He supported the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa.
Yeah.
So one has to say, could his assassination have been a way to prevent another Kennedy from getting into the White House and perhaps ending the Vietnam War in '68 and taking some other actions?
And of course, this is just about shortly after Martin Luther King had already
That's
been
right.
had been
That's right,
assassinated
2
for
months.
the same thing.
Yep.
The Poor People's Campaign, uniting black, white, Chicano, Native Americans together, pulling people in and also opposing the Vietnam War. He was warned, do not oppose this war.
That's right.
But he did.
That's right, and he did. So those are questions. The war on truth certainly took its toll there. And it also reached over into a war on whistleblowers, as we very well know, because there are two very prominent ones that most of us have heard about and lived with, Edward Snowden and Julian Assange.
Now, this is one that's not our generation, really, but
That's
we're
right.
here, so
That's
it is.
right.
But Phoenix and Savannah and all the people of this generation know quite well the price that truth.
The price you
You
pay
have
for
to pay.
truth. Right.
I mean, I can imagine if Snowden, and they've already, some of the senators and Hillary and all were against him, and some of them even said he needed to be assassinated. And
That's right.
Well, that's even popular opinion, because also these people get demonized, of course, like
Yep.
like within the mass media. So like people that do speak the truth, they could be telling everybody the truth, but then somebody on a TV or a radio or a website will be telling everybody that they
drink time.
are making it worse.
Yes.
Somebody
that's
doesn't have
true.
their phone on silent.
Yeah, but you know, the one thing about that is the fact that the thing when this came out with the NSA doing all this massive spying of
Oh,
everything, and it's
yes.
10 times worse than it was then. And he's, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Well, my question is, if the government has nothing to hide, why? I mean, nothing to fear. Why are they hiding everything?
Why are they hiding
Why don't they
everything?
tell the truth?
And then why are they subjecting us to
Yeah.
all of this scrutiny? And it is a little frightening. And maybe we have nothing to fear today, but what about tomorrow when we
Okay.
do? And they have already gathered their information. Many of us feel Julian Assange is a hero, and here he is holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy. Does anybody know how long he's been there? It seems
Oh,
like it's
God,
been
it's
so
been
long I can't
years.
remember when he wasn't there.
I know he's a permanent fixture there. It seems like and it is a prison.
It is a prison.
He can't leave, so
I mean, if anybody sees pictures of him, you see he looks like a ghost. He's not seen much sunlight, and it is quite bizarre. And there were the efforts that finally got dropped, I believe, to try to extradite him to Sweden. And there was a sure shot that if he got to Sweden, America was going to get him.
or to bring him here for
Bring him here.
trial.
That's right.
That was
That's
a big
right.
thing. He should be tried as a traitor for telling the truth.
For telling
if you,
the truth.
If you
For
tell the
telling
truth,
the
because no
truth.
one has denied
That's
anything
right.
that he said.
And, you know, if not for Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning would not have had an outlet for the information that she was able to leak, the collateral murder, which ironically was a tape that Reuters News Service had asked the Army for, because it was their journalists who had been murdered.
Working
And they
for them.
basically came to the Army and said, what did we do wrong? We need to learn from that. We can't be putting our journalists in harm's way. And the Army said, oops, we can't find it. And Chelsea Manning, just doing his job because he was in
Her job, yeah.
intelligence, found the tapes and went to, I don't know, one of the major news outlets, New York Times, The Guardian, whomever, and nobody wanted to touch it except Julian Assange.
What did you think when you first saw that?
When I first saw the video, I was
Yeah.
outraged, and of course I thought that the information should have gotten out. And I don't think that people seeing the video on its own is enough to endanger anybody. I think that that's
No.
a lie that's propagated in order to vilify the person who blew the whistle. I think when you're killing journalists with your guns that are funded by all these taxpayers' dollars, that's
Our
a problem.
dollars. We
Yeah,
paid for
we
it.
Well, it was
paid for
us,
this
yeah.
essentially. And like a journalist died for it for no good reason, and that's something people need to know. People need to know how their money is being spent, and I think for
Right.
the government to get mad at us for knowing is a problem.
But you know what was most important for me? Yes, the fact that it was happening, but most of us knew that. We just didn't see it before.
We didn't see it.
Right.
But was the callousness of those who were doing
Oh, my
the
God.
murder,
Yeah.
the killing at that point.
The audio.
And
between-
especially when they
yes.
the van
The-
came up to help,
to-
and there were children
that's right.
inside, and the callous said, "No, you can't take the child, the boy that they thought was dead. Can't take him. He's alive, but you can't take him to the U.S. He's got
Well,
to go to
and the comment
Iraqi,"
was
sort of
when
thing.
we were outraged about, firing at children. Well, what's wrong with those people? They take children into a battle zone? That was a comment that was
Oh,
made.
so-
If you haven't seen it, please
Please,
pull it
do
up
watch
and take a
Collateral
look at
Murder.
it and watch it closely.
Yeah. So those were two whistleblowers. Chelsea Manning did do time. He did some pretty severe time in isolation. He was finally pardoned.
She.
I'm sorry. She was finally pardoned
It's difficult
by,
for us, yes.
by President Obama. And we are thankful for that, although sad about so many of the people who are still sitting in prison and more important.
Right. Well, the
And-
lies that were told, even getting us involved in this in the first place, and so many people
Yes.
paid the price for that.
Yes.
For when the lieutenant colonel and Karen Kwiatkowski.
Yes.
I can't remember her
Karen
name.
Kwiatkowski.
Yeah, she was
Kwiatkowski.
working at the Pentagon and the CIA. And she
Yep.
exposed the lies leading to the invasion of Iraq, and so these lies were being exposed and told, and she too paid a price for it. But even beyond that, the one that we didn't think anything about or put in here, Abu Ghraib. And
That's
what
true.
we were doing there, the torturing and the imprisonment and things. I mean, we don't do that. I was taught
Right.
in school, in civics class, we're the good guys.
That's right. And the lead up to 2003, to the shock and awe, to the attack on Iraq.
Even
I
the
mean,
term, when you're murdering people, people are dying, and you say shock and awe.
right. And
Sort
you
of
pay
trivializes
you
it.
pay attention to that lead up, and here we have America insisting that Iraq's got weapons of mass destruction. They're a threat to us, and yet the weapons inspectors find nothing.
Right, and they said so.
And they said so.
They tried to tell
and
us.
yet, that's a story for another day, unfortunately, but it is. And, I don't know if you're all familiar with the name Daniel Ellsberg, but his name came up an awful lot during the Chelsea Manning trial because he had released a document called the Pentagon Papers back in the Vietnam days, which were incredibly eye-opening information that the U.S. government was keeping from us, and then suddenly it's out there.
And I'm surprised that so few people, even this generation, don't know about the Pentagon Papers because they were foundational to a lot of this exposure of government culpability.
Absolutely.
Well, that's something that I kind of wanted to comment on. It's really interesting because conspiracy theories are all the rage today, and everybody loves a conspiracy theory. And whenever there's a big domestic tragedy, then people are immediately turning it into conspiracy. But at the same time, like, there are real conspiracies, like these things that we're talking about here. Like, there's conspiracies to be able to enable war, and there's conspiracies to
Right.
be able to make it so that, like, we can justify the use of military to just be able to maintain resource control and kill people. And that's, like, these are provable, like, they're right in your face conspiracies.
Right.
And nobody's mad about those, but they're mad about, like, completely bogus ideas of, like, Sandy Hook being a conspiracy. Like, that's madness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, basically, what they're angry about are the people who step forward and tell the truth. I mean, Daniel Ellsberg was in a position to know the truth, and he jeopardized his life in some ways. He jeopardized his well-being. He jeopardized his job by coming forward with that information. He could have faced serious jail time. We're thankful that he didn't, but he certainly could have.
And there were many who did, though.
And there were many who did.
Many who
There
did.
were absolutely many who did. And Edward Snowden gave up an incredibly good job. He's in Russia, which I'm not going to say holed up in Russia in a disadvantaged place because I'm not going to say that, but
He's
he
probably
is.
living okay
He was
for a guy
taken
stuck in a
away from.
house.
That's right. He was taken away from his home, his family, on the run, and it was amazing that he did get away and wasn't
Well, it was
caught.
touch and go for a
Touch
long
and go.
time. He almost
That's right.
didn't make it, and
That's right.
I'm proud that he did.
I am too.
I'm proud that he did what he did. The fact that we are that supervised without realizing it,
Yeah.
and I don't know why more people don't take that as a serious threat.
I know.
We had to buy a new
Printer.
yesterday,
Yes.
so I'm trying to install it because it's wireless last night.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, I didn't have Savannah or someone there to do it for me.
That's right.
So I'm trying to talk to this guy.
These young people to help the old
I
go
know.
guys.
So I'm trying to talk to this guy. And so I called the number, asked Barbara what's the number on there, because I tried all this stuff with
Mm-hmm.
the disc and nothing was working. And the first thing he said was, "Well, hello, Albert. What can I do for you?"
So from
Wait a
your
minute
phone
now.
number, he knew who you were.
Didn't even ask anything. I
No.
didn't get a chance to say
No.
anything.
That's fairly old technology now.
I know. That's the
I know,
scary
but it is a
part.
little shocking when it happens.
So, it's interesting because actually what you're talking about being about that, like it's so prevalent though, and it kind of brings me back to how people are just brought up in this though. Like it's so normalized. Like being monitored is normalized, being lied to is
Yes.
normalized. Like,
It's
and
very-
even like kind of talking about it in a negative way is normalized to the point where people are like, yeah, I know it sucks that we're all monitored and that the truth isn't here. Oh, well, like I
But-
was born into this, like it's never going to be any different.
That's right, but it makes me safer.
Wasn't
I
it
realize
always this way?
There are so many people. Okay, this is 2017, so anybody who's 14 years old or younger has never known anything other than Middle Eastern wars, and anybody who's 16 and younger, that was 9/11. So that's the only life they've known.
Yeah.
And
It's sad.
It is.
It's
sad.
really sad that when truth is demonized
Yes.
and the lies are believed and praised, you
Yeah.
know, because the one thing that we should value above all things is the truth. It should be the one thing that we all want, you know.
That's right.
But we are accustomed to politicians lying. Wars happen by lies. They built up. And we secretly inside, I think most of us know, but we don't want to admit
We don't want to admit.
because we feel, I don't know why, sometimes
I don't know.
helpless or whatever.
I don't
but-
know. Cognitive dissonance, where we look the other way. It's easier to do that.
I think that's a big part of the kind of thing I was talking about with the
Yeah.
conspiracies, like how some people, like, I think when it comes to things like Sandy Hook, it's so horrible that they don't want to believe it. And then when
Right.
it comes to things like this, where it's like real conspiracies in their face, it's so horrible that they don't want
Wanna
to really,
believe it.
they don't
Right.
want it to be part of their lives.
But there's also a difference, but over there and here.
And here.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we can, the towers fall and 3,000 people die. That's the horror of the world, which it is. Nobody's making
Right.
light of that.
Right.
But then millions die, and
Well,
so what?
Right. Because
someone
global
else,
acts
but-
of terrorism happen every day.
Right.
And we only cared about it one
What was the
time.
thing
That's
the
right.
other day about your 9/11 is our everyday, or 24/7?
Yes, yes. And even 9/11 wasn't really here. It was in that place called New York City.
That's right, that was
which
it.
isn't really here for a lot of people. And what many people may not know is that there was a fairly large group of people, relatives, friends, lovers, family, of people who died in 9/11 who formed a group called Not in Our Name because they did not want to see the United States become the terrorists, go and fight these wars in the name of
The victims.
the victims.
Well,
Yeah.
I was always taught that it's not who they are that prompts; it's who I am,
Right.
and not to become them, more or less. But
And we had this conversation when it came to Libya, and I was saying that there was a very strong connection to the Lockerbie airline bombing, the takedown of that airline. Where I came from, there were a lot of students who were coming back from semester abroad that were on that plane.
that was Syracuse, right?
It was Syracuse University students, and you know, to this day, every year there's a memorial, and every year, and even though the bomb never really was proven that had the Libya connection, it was always there. It was always, this is the bad person who took it down. So when he was taken down, there was great joy that there was justice finally happened. So yeah, it goes on and on.
So that kind of brings back to a point that I wanted to mention at some point, which is that a lot of this sort of suppression of truth that we're talking about also comes, a part of it is specifically in misleading people and giving people an alternative idea of something which they can feel confident in otherizing something or creating some kind of false enemy or any false truth, which is often brought up in order to get public opinion going one way to
Yep,
support something, and it also
absolutely.
detracts people from the real truth.
That's
Well,
right.
the war on truth doesn't always mean you're fighting someone who speaks the truth. Sometimes by not speaking the truth,
Right.
you are having the war on
That's
truth.
right.
you
Or
know,
speaking
That's
a
right.
lie.
I was speaking, yeah,
Right.
knowingly too.
Knowingly. And even, you know, the two examples we gave of people who were trying to speak truth to use it to change policy didn't wind up, you know, they paid the ultimate price. But the, of course, irony is that the investigations that identified their assailants, their assassins, were the other. Were people, you know, the John Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald, was supposedly had strong ties to Russia. If that
And
sounds familiar.
Cuba, and Cuba, remember?
And Cuba, that's
But,
right, and
that's-
Cuba.
But the
that's
thing
right.
that from the quote that I read, you can see where Castro had an invested interest
Yes.
in Kennedy living.
staying alive. That's right.
Right. There's no
That's right.
logical reason
No,
to think that
absolutely
makes sense.
not.
But they'll still try to play it off that
That's
way.
right. Well,
And
they have.
so many people didn't even know much about that Cuban quote. I
Right.
mean, I didn't. I certainly didn't.
But so many people have the idea of vilifying them already, so then it just fits in with the
Yes,
preconceived
and
notion.
Sirhan, who was the accused assassin of Robert Kennedy, a Middle Eastern person, easy to demonize, that goes on and on and on. So, also the War on Truth is something that's used to go after political activists. So many of us know quite a bit about that. Back in our day, there was a group called the Weather Underground, the Weathermen, and they were activists. They wanted to change the system. They wanted to take down the system.
Well, it all sprang from something called the Students for Democratic Society
Yeah.
back then, and
That's right.
it was a revolutionary group, but most of it was through peaceful means.
Yes.
But there was a split, and two groups
Yep.
broke off. One was, of course, the Weather Underground, and it split into two. One which was strictly a communist group, and the other one was the Prairie Fire, which I
Right.
was associated. Well, I liked, and I had
Yep.
all their publications.
Yep.
I really supported this. I hate to say that now. Well, I don't hate to say it. I'm glad to say it,
Right.
but I'm sorry I didn't say it before.
Right.
Yeah, because I really supported their motives
Yep.
and what they were doing.
Yeah, but when it came to going after them, it was going after them regardless of what it was they were doing. And many of the people in that group paid a hefty price, went to prison for many years,
Yeah. Or lived a life underground like
or lived
Bernadine
a life
Dorn
underground.
had to hide
That's
for
right.
years
Or went
and
into exile.
on
Yep.
the top 10 of the FBI's
Yes.
wanted list. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Kurt, people.
Okay. So I understand that we're halfway through the show. Can that be possible?
No.
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 Where's the
Where'd the
important
time
people
go?
here? We've got to have another hour.
Where does the time go when you're having fun? Well, first I'm going to identify the station. You're listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. And I'm going to also tell you about an event that's coming up. The Savannah Voice Festival is premiering a new opera by Michael Ching entitled Anna Hunter, The Spirit of Savannah, on Thursday, November 2nd through Saturday, November 4th at the Davenport House, 324 East State Street. For more information and tickets, go to savannahvoicefestival.org/festival-events. So you're listening to Voices of Resistance. I'm Barbara, and we have Albert and Phoenix on the mics, and we have Savannah on the board. So thank you so much for listening to us.
Always in
as
control.
Yes, always in control, and we are quite thankful for that, let me tell you. We're talking about the War on Truth today and the victims of the War on Truth, some who wound up in graveyards, some in exile, and many, many more filling prison beds.
But also the rest of us are victims of the War on Truth because we
We
don't
are.
get the truth.
We are. That's right, because we don't have the truth, and we're making decisions based on not truth, untruth, and that is not a very good way to make decisions. So,
Well, some of the people that participated in this that opened up for me. Now, we have a friend, Will Griffin, and he's
Yep.
a Veteran for Peace member, board member, and
He's been on the show before.
yes, he's
Yes,
been on the
he's
show,
been on the
and
show.
he is technically a member of the local chapter 170, and we appreciate him as a friend and his program, the Peace Report. Please watch Peace Report. That's
Yes,
what it is, the Peace
absolutely.
Report. And Will Griffin, and he had a friend, Sean West McMorland.
yes, Sean
And-
Westmoreland.
I mean Westmoreland, McMorland. I'm
Sean
Irish.
Westmoreland.
Yes, Sean Westmoreland. I got the Sean right. He he helped build the infrastructure for the drone
Yes,
program in
yes.
Afghanistan. And he said some very important things. He had to resign from the Air Force because of what he had done, how he felt. But he stated one thing that really hit me hard. The military is out of control. And it is.
Yes, and
Indeed,
it is.
We're halfway around the world, 800 bases, billions of dollars every year wasted on support groups, and killing people that we don't know, never met, never did anything
That's
to us,
right.
nor we to them. and yet it's just this mass murdering machine. And we're training our children to the programs in schools and all, and to stand up and salute and to
That's right.
sacrifice themselves for this machine that's out of control.
That's
in this
right. And
government.
with these overt actions and then the covert actions of our surveillance system, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, it is truly out of control. And when we're not getting the truth about what they're doing, it's even more out of control.
What's that look on your face, Albert?
If you don't have the truth, how can you make an honest decision about anything?
Oh, we can't. Well, that's why we're not given the truth, though, because if the people had the truth, we wouldn't be at war.
And we'd
like
rise
you
up-
said, you said the first casualty of any war is the truth, and that's always been true since before we were actually even having press to tell people we would
It
vilify
has to
the
be, or
other.
there'd be no wars.
Right, because we wouldn't go around killing people. That's not normal, unless we're told something which leads us to think that we should.
And the rich wouldn't be getting richer while the poor are dying.
That's right.
that's what it
right.
always comes down to.
That's
Yeah.
it. Class war.
And, very often the war on truth goes after people just simply because of who they are. So we discovered an interesting, I mean sad, very, very sad. So in the 1990s, there were some accusations that China had helped support the re-election campaign of Bill Clinton. And after he was reelected in 1996, and if that sounds familiar, Playbook in 2016.
Change the countries.
We've talked about this before. If the playbook works, you keep doing it.
Right.
So I was around then. I don't remember it, but Anyway, in 1999, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times started a thing about secrets that were being leaked from Los Alamos, and that these secrets were getting into the hands of the Chinese, and they were going to be able to build their nuclear arsenal because of the secrets that they were getting. And they identified this person, Wen Ho Lee, as the person who was stealing the secrets and getting them to China. Now, Wen Ho Lee was a Taiwanese-born nuclear scientist working at Los Alamos. And because of his Asian background, he was an easy target.
But he wasn't even Chinese, right?
But he wasn't even Chinese.
Well, it depends. Don't tell the Chinese that. They
That's
still
right.
think Taiwan is China. So
It's China now, but
Chiang
it wasn't.
Kai-shek set
But
up
it
that
wasn't
one, so.
Yeah.
for the longest time. It was really a more independent place. But whether or not, the fact that he was Chinese working at Los Alamos and somehow there were secrets that were being leaked, he became the perfect target for the untruth. He wound up putting in 9 months in solitary confinement, pre-trial.
Now, that's
because of
pre-trial.
this
He's been convicted of
pre-trial.
nothing.
That's right, because of this. And it was a partnership of the government and the media that created, that targeted him. And then what happened when the case got to a judge?
He asked for proof.
He asked for proof.
Wait,
And
so the judge was cool then?
so the judge was cool. He asked
There
he
are
asked for documents.
Oh, that happens.
And clearly the White House had no
Once in a
documents to
while,
give
yeah.
him. And the whole house of cards fell. And Wen Ho Lee the charges were dropped. In fact, they trumped up some stupid pornography charges against him, which he also denied, which they had no proof of. And but
But part of this, too, the familiarity with it, is that they were accused of funneling money to the Democratic Party in those days.
in those days,
And it was the Clinton. And this past time, it's Russia who is supposed to have supported
the opposition.
Republican Party against another Clinton.
That's right.
And we
Imagine
keep, all
that.
this stuff just keeps
Imagine
going.
that.
Now, this was a really sloppy frame-up that wasn't able to be followed through with, but that doesn't happen very often. They're lucky in this instance.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of folks who are political prisoners now because they were arrested for things they didn't do, and even though there was no evidence for those things, they're still thrown in
Still in
prison
jail.
for a long time, and they're
That's
still
right.
in jail
Prison.
today.
That's right. Or have had to leave the country in exile, which gets us to continuing on this political activism, people who were active in the civil rights movement. And clearly we have, two examples. Yes,
Black Panthers,
the Black Panthers.
who also were associated with the SDS, which
Yes.
we talked about a few
Yes,
moments ago,
absolutely.
and the Weatherman Underground.
Right. And in one of our prior shows, we talked about George Jackson, who had been a member of the Black Panthers and the Black Liberation Army, and who had gone to prison for a sentence of 1 year to life, which is a way of controlling people.
At the time of Angela Davis. And
That's right. And he realized he was never getting out because of his politics, not because of the crime he committed. And that's, he was basically a political prisoner. And he finally decided, I'll be free one way or the other. And he tried to escape and was killed.
Well, he knew he couldn't escape. So.
Right. When he knew he couldn't escape and he just couldn't take the prison conditions any longer. And of course, Martin Luther King, who, when
He
you
had
say
the same
civil
enemies
rights,
as Robert Kennedy did.
he
The
and
CIA, the mafia,
That's right.
the organized labor, and
That's right.
the FBI. And
because clearly some things that we discovered about Martin Luther King, in addition to the civil rights, in addition to voting rights and civil rights for people of color, he was also against the Vietnam War, which a year before his death he gave a very famous speech at the Riverside Church in Manhattan called Breaking Silence. And he spoke out vehemently against Vietnam and tied it to the failure of the war on poverty, which should have been a good war to end poverty. But how can you end poverty when you're spending all your money fighting this war thousands of miles away against people who've never harmed you?
It's also worth pointing out, like, a lot of people don't know that there was a civil court case which was proved by the end. It was stated by the judge that there was evidence of conspiracy that involved the federal government as well as organized
the
crime
FBI
syndicates.
and organized crime.
Yeah,
Right.
Involved with the assassination of Martin Luther King
That's
Jr.
right.
And people
And-
don't want to believe that.
No,
but
they
it
don't
is
want to
factual.
believe it. But, Martin Luther King just became dangerous when he stuck to, letting people vote. It was all good. Better to deal with him than some of those more radical people.
Like
But
Malcolm
when-
X, who
like
was
Malcolm
also
X.
assassinated.
That's right. But when he got into some more dangerous territory, as John and Bobby Kennedy, then it was time. He needed to be taken out.
Now these are really big names, and they paid the ultimate price. But of course, this is such a common thing. It's so normal, and there's so many people that they're
Right.
constantly sent to prison. One of them I wanted to mention was formerly H. Rap Brown. Or now he's the Imam Jamil Abdullah Alamin. He was known very well in his community for helping to organize it into something more sustainable, something that was a more integrated community system.
Yes.
And he's known to be a very amazing speaker. And they accuse him for a crime that it really does not seem like he committed. There's a lot of very shaky evidence in this case. And also, he was a huge public figure. It does not make very much sense. But
Right.
definitely worth looking into that. There's the Imam Jamil Action Network, but this is just one of so many people.
For
Yeah.
every name we've mentioned, there are literally thousands or tens of thousands of other people who will never, ever
Thousands.
be known.
That's
but
right.
who
Thousands and thousands of people who
This-
were accused of things on sketchy evidence, false evidence, planting things, and are sitting in prison right now.
Of course,
One-
this happens to people that aren't even truth tellers.
That's right.
So how are we going to
That's
figure it
right.
out when it happens to people that were specifically trying to get something out there?
And
That's right.
look at the civil rights movement. Look at all the people who were
Yep.
the freedom bus riders
Yes.
that came through trying to
Yes.
help people. Look at the people who were just transporting
Yeah.
people from one spot
Yeah.
to another and were
That's right.
stopped and murdered
That's right.
because of
That's
they
right.
were. So it's interesting. There was one that was really a surprise to me, and I'm sure Barbara too. Was this Robert F. Williams?
Robert F.
He was
Williams, what
amazing.
a
Now, this
fascinating
guy-
person.
Yeah, he was the Monroe, North Carolina. He was
Mm-hmm.
the president of the chapter of the NAACP there in the 50s and early 60s. And he had to escape also. But he did something that was really unique.
Amazing.
He
Totally
fled to
amazing.
Cuba, where he broadcast this Radio-Free Dixie
Yep.
program to Southern blacks, and with the approval now of Castro
Yes.
and Cuban citizens, and it
Yes.
ran for 3 years.
I know.
And
I'm sorry I never got to hear it, and I wonder if there's copies of the broadcast. It would be fascinating to hear. But thinking about, starting a chapter of the NAACP, which none of us really consider to be a particularly radical organization.
Especially not today.
No, not today. But, he was a pretty amazing person who paid a price of exile and did some amazing things.
Speaking of which, we've got this new BIE thing.
Yes, this new BIE thing. If any of you aren't familiar with BIE, it's called the Black Identity Extremists. It's a new term, a new FBI designation. This new group of domestic terrorists, Black Identity Extremists. And it's a label for black activists.
Also, they just took white supremacists off of that list.
Are you serious?
I'm pretty
I
sure
didn't
about
know
that.
that.
Don't take that
know
at
that.
100%, but I'm
Okay.
pretty sure that was a thing recently. Was that they either took white supremacists as a subject off of it, or they took a bunch of white supremacist groups off of the list.
Well,
Okay.
Phoenix just said something very important. Don't take everything 100%.
That's
that we say.
right.
Research it yourself
Research it.
and find out.
That's
that we're-
right. Please do
That's
that.
actually really relevant to the thing I was going to add to this about the BIE thing, because with the Black Identity Extremist designation by the government, also this works in tandem with the media, who are vilifying activists, as we know,
Right.
also anti-fascist activists or just general anti-capitalist, and so of course Black Lives Matter is included with this. And that's this part of this whole larger issue too, where we've got the media working with the government, and it is vilifying the people who try to tell us the truth. It is also
That's right.
obfuscating the truth from us all. And so how do y'all find information like in this time where the truth is specifically kept away from us? Like, how do you find real truth? How do we find the truth that we use for this show even?
But we talked about this for a few minutes
Yep,
because
we
Phoenix
did.
brought this up. What resources are there really available that you can trust?
That's right.
And I think we come to the conclusion that maybe not everything, but certainly things like you have to use your own common sense, number one. That's one thing. And
Even that can be
if
risky.
you have it,
If you
know.
have common sense, you have to use it.
Yeah,
People
but
tend
you
to
can-
not know that they don't have it.
Right, but from your own experiences,
Yes.
and then when you listen to people and what they do or prove to be true.
Right.
I have my list of things that I go through. I trust certain investigative journalists,
Absolutely.
and they're disappearing at a rate that you wouldn't believe. They're
They are
almost
disappearing.
Yeah.
They are a rare breed. But the other really important thing that I didn't think of earlier is when you read something, look at who is sponsoring
That's
the
right.
program, look at who is sponsoring the article. When you see research, look for conflict of interest and who is sponsoring it. The Vietnam series, for example.
That was what I was trying to get
Yes.
to. Who's sponsoring that?
The Koch brothers.
Ooh.
The
Ooh.
real bastions
Ooh.
of truth. And I use the word bastions.
Yes. And I came
That's
across
a new
that.
Ken Burns documentary they're
Yes, it is.
referencing.
And
by
I
the
came
way.
across that years ago when I was listening to stories on NPR, and I was thinking, boy, I'm surprised to hearing a story like this. And I talked to other people, and they said, well, look at the sponsors. Look at who's sponsoring. As the government support for public radio, public broadcasting got less, they had to go out and search for sponsors. And boy, you get sponsors, and they're going to want to have some editorial say in the editorial comment.
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember that a lot of these organizations, the media, as we talked about in another radio show before, most of the media is owned by like the same few companies.
Mm-hmm.
These rich people obviously have an agenda in order to keep
Right.
themselves rich.
Right.
So, I mean, for me personally, I don't know anything, and I know nothing. And when I read the news, I'm like, I know that I don't know anything of this is true. But you still take in as much. I try to take in as much
Right.
information as I can. But also a thing to really look out for is like, how do you know when you're looking at something that is true, and it's something
Right.
that's trying to mislead you, because that's something that we're also dealing with.
Yep. And this, yeah.
Also, the pushback. You know, if
Right.
someone speaks something and the government is pushing back on it, saying this is not true at all, but yet there's
That's right.
evidence to back it up, that supports, like Glenn Greenwald.
Yes.
Now, some of the news organizations, like the New York Times, most of the time I don't trust them. The Guardian,
Not
I used
anymore.
to trust
Not
more,
anymore.
but they slipping a bit too.
That's
but they
right.
did do the Snowden thing with
That's right.
Glenwall, so I trust
Right.
Glenwall. I trust Jeremy Scahill.
Yep.
I trust the and what is it? Intercept, the new
Yes.
agency.
Yes.
They started an
Yep.
investigative
And
journalism.
RT.
And RT and In fact, the fact that they are
That's
having to be registered as an agent of a foreign government.
Makes me respect them more.
Yeah, a little
right?
bit,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, absolutely. And,
And
the
this
thing about the black
John Pilger.
Yes, John Pilger. The thing about the black identity extremists is now that there's that label, many of us have heard the term COINTELPRO, which was a program of the FBI, the CIA, to go after groups like the Black Panthers back in the 60s and 70s. And we can all see all of this coming around again. And it is quite frightening.
Now, they're able to get away with that, though, because, again, these groups were vilified. The Black Panthers were painted as this violent
Right,
organization.
that's right.
Which they weren't.
Which
Which
they weren't.
but they were painted that way. There's one civil rights activist that I would just like to mention before we move on to another category, and that's Mumia Abu-Jamal, who was an author, who was an activist, and did get caught up in COINTELPRO style, arrested, sentenced to death in a very unfair trial for the murder of a Philadelphia policeman. Many of us were kind of hoping that at the end of the Obama term he too would be pardoned, but isn't. He's very ill. The prison he's in has refused to give him medical treatment until a judge finally intervened. It's a very sad situation. He's living on death row, but barely living.
And that brings up another one that we have a little more intimate relationship with is Leonard Peltier.
Yes, Leonard Peltier.
The same situation. He was
Yes.
caught up by the FBI. He is being denied
That's
in
right.
Florida, away from his people. Nobody can come and see him. He is a political prisoner.
An activist in the
an
American
activist
Indian movement, AIM.
And so the indigenous portion of this is not to be taken
No,
lightly. Because,
not to be taken
we
lightly.
Have Red Fawn,
Absolutely.
Red Fawn Follis from
Yep.
Standing Rock, who
Yep.
and Russell Means, of course. We know about Russell Means with
Yep.
the American Indian movement, and I got to meet some of these people when I was at Standing Rock, and not, of course,
Right.
Russell Means, but
Right, not
he
Russell
he
Means.
wasn't there.
But,
Yeah,
you know,
Dennis Banks.
when I realized, that Leonard Peltier was somebody that they were petitioning to try to get pardoned,
Yeah.
and seeing what was going on in the country right now with the Native Americans, with
Yeah.
Standing Rock and pipelines and other places, I thought, there's no way they're going to pardon him because he's an activist and they don't
It's
want him
not
out on the
going to
street.
happen, right.
No, it's not going to happen. And,
Chase
he's been
Iron Eyes.
imprisoned for 35 years for a crime he didn't commit.
Right, and they even said, the FBI even said they had no evidence on him.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, then there is the Oscar Rivera Lopez,
Yes.
which we were in New York when he was released, when he
Yes.
was freed, and
Yes.
he was supposed to have this big celebration
Yeah.
in New York City, and
We had to come back to
leave
Savannah.
that day or the next
Yeah.
day. And
Yeah.
we couldn't be there, but
Yes, he was an activist for Puerto Rican independence,
which they sorely need.
and we are going to be talking about that in a couple of weeks. In terms of the hurricanes, in terms of what's going on in Puerto Rico, and I hope you'll all tune in for that because we are really looking forward to that. Yes.
Oh, is now a good time for me to ask, how do y'all recognize if you're reading something that's trying to mislead you? And
Well, there's no surefire way. We did just talk about, look at who's sponsoring it, look at who's writing it, look at if somebody that has written things in the past that you trust.
I think also another good thing, very important thing, is pay very close attention to the language that's used, especially
my
in the
Yeah.
headlines.
The language.
I mean, I know you're not supposed to use headlines to get your story, and you shouldn't. But also notice that if the headline has a sensational bent to it, or if it's specifically talking about if the person's a Muslim, or if they're an immigrant, or if they're an illegal, or if they're using these
Well,
charged
it's the
words.
It's the words that are used to describe people. I don't mind knowing that somebody immigrated here.
No,
I'm okay
that's
with
fine.
that.
But if the
I don't
story has
want them-
nothing to do with that, that's the thing. Is
right,
when
if
you're
the story has nothing to do with it and how they refer to it. I
Well-
don't want to hear anybody called an illegal alien.
You also have to realize that most people don't go beyond the headline.
right.
They really don't. So
That's
when
right.
they see something, terrorist group Hezbollah, or terrorist
Right.
group this, or
That's right.
terrorist, and a name afterwards,
Right.
it's in their mind already, and that is the tool that the government uses when they put out these stories.
right.
Or
and
these
the
media
press
groups.
picks
And
them up.
there are
the
opportunities.
tool
There are
is the media
opportunities in every city, every place to actually go listen to people who've come back from Palestine, who've come back from places, hear their stories, listen to them tell you what life was like, and what happened to them when they had to cross, from Israel to Palestine or back.
And we have discovered there are other things like the BDS thing. I do want to mention that one about
BDS,
Dickinson,
yes.
Texas. Now, of course, Maryland
Oh my God.
already has made the governor has signed, and also New York
New
has
York and
signed.
Minnesota.
And Minnesota, that if you are a company dealing with BDS, you're supporting it, they will not do business
They will
with
not
you
do
at all.
business. And it's not just a company, it's an individual or a nonprofit.
The biggest thing was this little town in Texas of like 10,000 people called Dickinson, Texas now. Now, of course, the state also, I think Texas is toying with it or has done it. I'm not sure of doing
We
that
don't know
also. And
that,
this town
yeah.
was devastated by Harvey. I mean, it was almost annihilated, and 90% of the city. So there was money collected. 50% was destroyed.
Private donations.
Private donations. But the city was supposed to dispense
The
this
city
money
is
to people who
administering
needed it, but they made them sign that they did not support BDS to get the money.
In order to get
Isn't
the money.
Didn't the government say some kind of thing, try to define that as being like a racist organization or something?
Well, that wasn't necessarily part of this story, but we did a little research on our own into what Dickinson looked like. And we discovered that Dickinson looks like, from the demographics we saw, a rather wealthy suburb of Houston. So you can imagine this wealthy suburb.
At least
of,
middle and upper middle.
Yes. So, maybe it was an easy sell there.
I would
we
like
have
to say one
so
thing.
many more people to talk about. What do we want to do with our last 5 minutes?
3
minutes.
I do
Oh
want to
my
say one
God.
thing.
Oh, no.
I
What's
have
up,
one
Albert?
thing to say.
Okay.
No, I have a lot of things to say,
Okay,
but I
say
won't
them.
have time.
Say them.
The one thing I have to say is that you out there who are listening, you think you're safe. You think because you're not doing
Right.
anything, right? Well, it's been released recently, and these reclassifications of things of who is a terrorist and who is not a terrorist, and as these governments become more and more afraid of the people,
That's right.
there will be more and more people classified. Now we know about what they call the extremists, the terrorist environmentalist groups like Earth First and those, and say the animal rights
Yeah.
groups,
Yeah.
who are just doing what should be done.
Trying to
but
save the earth.
That's right, and it's a horrible thing. So they think. So they're on a watch list.
Right.
But even attending a demonstration or in support of some of these groups, or even some of the benign groups.
That's
Now, Sierra Club has been benign for a long time, but it's coming up a little bit more in the news lately. And if you attend these, you can be labeled a terrorist, but
And
it's a
now-
low-level terrorist.
That's right. And they have face recognition software now.
But-
They're talking about using little teeny drones to kind of infiltrate events and activities and identify people.
Like they need that since they got cell phones and everybody.
That's right. But
Yes.
that's true with the drones, because now which cities were it's going to, Los Angeles is now investing a lot of money in
could be, yes, drone
drones
technology
for the
to
police
get the drone.
department.
Yes.
That's another show we're going to do on the militarization of the police departments, especially Savannah. We've got to do a lot of research
the
on that.
militarization of society as a whole, which as Phoenix said, the younger generation, it's becoming so commonplace. You don't think about it. There are cameras on every corner. There's technology in your car, in your phone, in your tablets that track you, that know where you are, know where you've been, know what you're doing.
And don't forget there was Occupy.
And don't forget there was Occupy. That's right. So
Wait. What about Occupy?
Spied on.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And-
It was
and
fun.
infiltrated.
totally infiltrated, and
Absolutely.
all the mayors in the city,
In
17
fact-
cities were
In fact, we
cooperating at
have
the same
the
time
names.
on how to
That's
destroy
right.
it.
We have the names of 4 people who were arrested from Occupy Cleveland, arrested in 2012 for theoretically planning to blow up a bridge. Now they could have been sitting around saying, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we blew up that bridge?" With no intention to do it, having a conversation, and
That's it.
actually were arrested.
It's also worth noting too that pretty much any of those groups that did end up getting arrested for having
Okay.
terrorist plots
We have 20 seconds.
were pushed
Okay.
forward
We
by
gotta-
an
all right.
infiltrator from the government. I'm done.
Next show.
Okay. Next show
show.
is November 1st. Now, according to this 2017 peace calendar that I've been reading, November is designated as Native American Awareness Month. We're using this designation as an excuse to highlight 520 years of indigenous resistance to white European colonialism and continuing American oppression. We're calling our show This Land is Whose Land? And using this date to talk about indigenous resistance to
525 years.
525 years. And in keeping with our prior show's theme of decarceration, we'll also talk about how this oppression keeps indigenous people imprisoned in concentration camps, also known as reservations, but also feeds the prison industrial complex. So
Thank you.
thank you for listening to us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Next time.